are maybe 1 degree of separation away from almost everyone who does work on the Hill. Their entire lives are basically being dictated and controlled by early 20-year-olds.
Oh my God, yeah, they're really here. And I was like, wait, who? Like, I literally looked around and I was like, what are we talking about right now? Because I kind of got scared. And I realized she was talking about the guard. And
I like my politicians to have lived some life and had some real world experience before they show up in Capitol Hill.
all of your best connections come from people who like authentically know and respect you. So, like, why would you act like any other way outside of that? Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Washed Up. It's episode 52. I'm Abby. This is Colin, and we comment on the weekly news so that you don't have to listen to the legacy media that your grandparents do. Today is May 24th, and we are back at it with another sort of evergreen episode. Now that I've been in the space of DC for a year, have worked a little bit there, have been, you know, back and forth to the West Coast, even in this year, comparing it, have always lived on the West Coast my entire life. We thought it'd be a fun episode to give advice to our past selves about what we didn't know about DC and what we do now.
And so we're sharing some tips, some survival guide tips for people trying to move to DC because it's a very unique city. Let's just get right into it. I think first, starting off, we talk about how there's a lot of misconceptions about DC, about, yeah, everything's about politics, everything is super partisan, and that can create sort of tension and divisiveness. But that's not all that DC is. I think there's a lot that it has to offer in terms of the cultural and the artistic side. So, how have you encountered that in the city?
Yeah, it's actually kind of funny talking about this now because one of the reasons why I moved to DC initially was because I used to have this job where we would give an orientation to like our students about DC, and one of them was misconceptions about like the people who live here. And I had this like whole intro about like how people outside of DC who've never been here maybe think it's all politics or it's all very ideological or people are like at each other's throats, but that's not all it is. There's so many different subcultures of DC. There's so many different types of people here who are here for maybe their career, maybe to like find themselves, maybe there's just such different pockets of different types of people here in terms of like arts. Like there's some people who like are the least apolitical people ever and still live here, which could be surprising to some people, but they definitely exist.
Yeah, and in terms of the artistic and like cultural side, also they have a lot of events here to kind of bring people together. I'm thinking of early in May, they always do this fun thing in DC with it's called like Passport Day, where a lot of the embassies open up to anyone can just go in and like tour the embassies. So that was really fun. I did that not this year, but last year and went to like Peru, the Philippines, Botswana, Trinidad and Tobago. Like they just it was so interesting and they set up like a little cultural experience in each one of the embassies and you kind of get to get like a feel for it and I think that day kind of summarizes the experience of DC too where there's so many different cultures and like you said it's a very diverse city in terms of who's here, why they're here. Yes, the tr political transactional side of it comes through often, but if you are willing to engage with the different events that they have and explore and really like get out there, there's it's a lot of fun.
Every time I'm out and about in DC, I always think about like the diversity of it. There is so many different types of people I meet from like honestly all over the world. There's a lot of like international people that come through, maybe just to visit or people who move here. It's like really surprising because I think there's a different type of diversity on like the West Coast. Like I've met people who I've only ever met, I guess, like abroad when I've been traveling in Europe or South America, wherever, different types of cultures. But here, like, it's just so like it's kind of like ironic to say this or like cliche to say this, but it really is like it feels like this like mixing pot of like people sometimes that I never would have expected to meet otherwise.
Totally. And yeah, so as far as things to do in DC too, places you can go and explore, one of my favorite places to go and meet people potentially also is the National Mall. It's just so gorgeous, especially in the summer and the spring. Like right now is kind of the peak time in May, and they just have the most amazing. Obviously, the monuments are there: the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial, the Capitol on the other side. But there's so many different museums to go to, and I love all the Smithsonian's and Natural History Museum is great. One of my favorites is the National Gallery too. They have like a whole wing of Italian art. They have the only Da Vinci in the US is in the Italian wing. They have the European wing that has like English, French, and American art too. And then my other favorite museum in that sort of vicinity, this is all off of like Constitution Ave, is the National Archives, which I wasn't expecting to think was so great, but a friend of mine we were down there by like during last 4th of July, and we got to go and actually see the like Declaration of Independence. They have this massive hall where anyone can just go and walk past all the founding documents pretty much. And so it was just a remarkable experience. So there's so much to do downtown and on that National Mall area.
I remember the very first time my dad and I came to DC together, he really, really wanted to see the Constitution, and like the Declaration of Independence and go to the National Archives. Like that was like his like number one thing for some reason. So you saying that really reminded me of that and how many like actual history is here. Whenever somebody who had never lived in DC before, who had never been to DC before, comes to DC and I'm with them, it is such like a privilege to be able to see it through like fresh eyes, I think. Like my friend who I was just with and we were in DC, like she was like we were driving like past the White House and like past the Capitol Hill area and she just kept being like, this is like insane. And I was confused because I'd be like, what do you mean? Like, I was literally like, what's insane? Like, what's happening? Like, I literally remember thinking to myself, like, is there like Secret Service around or something like that? Is something crazy happening? But she was genuinely just like, isn't it kind of crazy that you can drive around here and see all these things? And I'm like, yeah, I guess you're right. It is kind of crazy.
We've both been into the Capitol a number of times, but probably you more than me. Last time I was there was when Jimmy Carter died, and a bunch of friends of mine, we went and stood in line for like 2 hours to get inside, and we finally did, and they had his casket in the like rotunda area. Beautiful space. They also had Trump's second inauguration was indoors in the rotunda, just this massive like dome inside the Capitol, and a lot of art and statues all along the walls. So it was beautiful and very moving to go for that occasion. But what has it been like when you go there to the Capitol building?
Um, in my last job, I used to go to the Capitol like once a week. And it was interesting because my job wasn't directly affiliated with the Hill or anything like that, or anything that is super, I guess, like DC. I worked with a lot of pre-law students where we'd have to like take them around to like different places, and um, one of them was definitely the mall and the hill that I would go to like once a week or once every other week. And I think it was such an interesting ecosystem to be an outside looker on and in because I knew it so well at this point. Like I knew like all like the different stops to go to. I knew how to like get tickets for our group to like go sit in on the galleries, whether that be Senate or the House, or I knew what days like we should go and what days we shouldn't go. Um, but it was kind of funny because I think I was starting to like recognize like different I guess like staffers around or like different faces that I remember seeing. It's always chaos around there for the most part, at least when I would always go. People running around, lots of like I would always tell people like when we were sitting in on the Senate galleries and like people were actually making votes on stuff, like they would just come in and like put their thumbs up or down and then they would like exit. And our students would be so confused. They're like, is this how they're voting right now? And I'm like, yeah, but you kind of just see like the different like staff interns like actually running around like with like papers or like going back and forth. And I think that was always really interesting and silly.
Yeah, we've learned a bit about how the Hill works behind the scenes. Again, neither of us work on the Hill or really have any direct connection, but just being in DC, you are maybe 1 degree of separation away from almost everyone who does work on the Hill. And so, whether we have direct relationships with like Congress members, not really, but we have met people in their offices, and all the different offices get together for various things. But things that happen behind the scenes. Basically, the members of Congress are kind of shepherded around from place to place, from obligation to obligation. They have very busy schedules. And so their entire team is basically run by staffers. Apparently, staffer is not a very nice way of saying it. Like they prefer like entry level professionals or whatever, but we're gonna call them staffers. And the staffers arrange the congressman's day so that it all runs smoothly. And as Abby was saying, sometimes they're even like running in and out, communicating about how their member is gonna vote, essentially.
Uh-huh.
And so it is very chaotic and it is fun when you're there. You hear stories because, again, we've said on the show, The Hill speaks and everyone's kind of back channeling and there's all this information like kind of oozing out of the Capitol at all times. But we also think it's hilarious how a lot of these very kind of professional, like upright congressmen, their entire lives are basically being dictated and controlled by early 20-year-olds.
It's literally, it's the craziest ecosystem that you didn't even know existed. I had no idea until I like talked to people around the area or like had been involved in the Hill space, but not like directly involved. I remember one time Colin and I were talking with a mutual friend of ours who like had never lived in DC before, and she was just so interested to hear us talking about like I guess the behind the scenes of like how this stuff is run. Like obviously like if there's like a tiny mistake or something like that, like it's not the end of the world, but to think that like something as important is run by like a bunch of 20-year-olds is like really funny. Like they're literally the foundation, like backbone of a lot of the things.
It reminds me of the Beyonce song, Who Runs the World? And the answer is staffers. They're all just running around ushering their member from place to place, and that's kind of how it goes. But I mean, that's one of the perks of being a congressman, I guess, is you don't have to be like super on it all the time in terms of your planning and all this. And you have like a chief of staff who runs your office like the military, basically. And it must be nice. It would be nice to have. We should get a staffer to support Watchdog.
We're
And
everything. We're the chief of staff, we're the staffer, we're the
the
face.
social media, yeah. That's the other thing. They have so the congressmen, most of them don't run their own social media accounts. I hope everyone knows that. Most politicians, in fact, don't run their social media. Even Donald Trump, who I've heard does have a lot of personal oversight and insight into his own what gets posted on Truth Social, for instance. I doubt he's often the one hitting send on every single post, if any post, honestly. A lot of times it is like those younger entry-level professionals who work in communications or PR or something like that, who are drafting statements, drafting posts in the voice of their congressperson. And that's what you end up seeing on social media. And a lot of times, if a quote is like picked up from a congressperson in the media, chances are it might not even have been directly dictated by them, but rather, again, staffers.
hmm And like those social media trends that you see like politicians do or congresspeople or whatever, it's not them doing it. Like,
It's not because they're just that hip and in touch with the youth. It's because the youth are directing them at every turn. Say this, do this, look at the camera this way at this moment. So it's kind of obnoxious if you ask me. Like it would be cool if our Congress people actually had some like finger to the pulse maybe. But it's kind of all again orchestrated, theatrical, a show. I don't like it personally.
we're always talking about theatrics around here, it feels like. Because it's true, it's like one big show. It's really interesting though when you understand it.
That's what, again, we talk about the Supreme Court. We love the court and how that works because it's less about that. Like, you don't have justices posting on social media because they don't have constituencies. They are there for a very specific reason to make rulings about these super important things. And there's a level of professionalism that brings and a level of credibility and kind of authority that, like, you don't have to be posting on social media 24/7 to stay relevant as a Supreme Court justice. And that's why that's probably my favorite branch of government.
Yeah, I like that they're not people who need to be swayed by the outside sources.
Abby in the past has made a joke about how we're gonna on this show the members of the cabinet are gonna be taken down one by one as we kind of talk about and expose them. And I just wanted to point out on Friday, Tulsi Gabbard mentioned that she was resigning, although in that case citing her husband's health concerns. So yeah, we're not happy about that at all. She was probably one of the cabinet members that I was more in favor of, but now she's gonna be stepping away.
And it's another woman.
Yeah, and a lot of them, the women who have been leaving the cabinet have been mostly replaced by men. So that's another interesting dynamic, something to keep in mind. The other thing I wanted to point out, the premonition of us talking about the lawfare with Donald Trump back 2 years ago in May. Um, they just announced that Trump is having a $2 billion slush fund almost, where essentially people who have been victims of lawfare can go and apply to have a board distribute money to the people who are claiming to be victims of that and weaponized of the government. And there's a lot of ethical concerns because there's not going to be much oversight with this. And yeah, some people are calling it the most brazen act of violating the Constitution by any president ever.
He just loves going for the most outrageous awards. Um,
So let's talk a little bit more about being in DC while Trump has been president too.
yeah, I
There's a
think that's
lot.
a good. I think that's a good transition. Well, I people who are consistent listeners of Washed Up knows that we will like reference from time to time, like when he's in town, it feels like a different type of like air. Um, as we're recording this right now, both of us are in DC, and we there was like a shooting attempt yesterday at the White House, and that was really interesting. Nothing really came about. Somebody was wounded, I think. The gunman was killed. Um, Trump like released something this morning, but what I'm going with on this is like I remember Colin texted me like, "Did you see this?" And I was like, "Oh my God, I literally was passing there like 15 minutes beforehand." So I think the amount of like recently like political violence in the air is something that has been a thought on my mind when I'm like walking around when I'm in DC. So that's something I've been thinking about recently.
That's definitely a feature of living here, unfortunately. And yeah, so the shooting that happened yesterday at the White House, but then also it reminded me of in November there was two National Guard who were shot, and I know Sarah
We covered
Beckstrom's
that.
killed one of the guards, and it does bring up these concerns because back then we had mentioned that shooting happened just like right by where you were working at the time, not far from where I live. Then there was the attempted assassination at the White House Correspondents' Dinner at the end of April. And these are just like myriad examples of threats of violence or people trying to carry out violence. And sometimes pedestrians end up caught in the crossfires, unfortunately. And you just have to be very cognizant and mindful whenever you're out in public or at a public event, especially. And I hate that you have to kind of be looking over your shoulder.
Especially when you're in those areas too, and like I'm like my body will like physically react sometimes when I like see like for example like the Secret Service cars and like the sirens, or sometimes I'm like automatically like what happened, like who died, like who's injured. And I don't know if you feel the same way
Yeah.
when you see those cars, or like when you're out and about, and I kind of just like want to stop and be like, should I be concerned right now?
And sometimes the answer is yes. I mean, there was another shooting actually earlier this month on the mall, and I was running by after the fact, so they had it roped off at this point. But apparently, like no one was targeted specifically. No one, as far as I know, died, especially not any politicians. But apparently, Vance's motorcade had just gone by. Someone fired off some shots, not at the motorcade, but just in the area, and then they did have to like shut down that part of the mall. So yeah, I mean, it's a city. There's going to be crime. There's going to be shootings. There's going to be incidents like that, as with any city. But here, again, it takes on a different tone, and you do have to be a little bit extra cautious. And unfortunately, that leads to some overcompensation, in my opinion, of other people like wanting to keep everything super secure and super on lock at all times, and putting up all the barricades anytime there's a public event, and shutting everything down, like with Trump's inauguration. And I don't like the expansion of like the security state and the omnipresence of the security. That's another thing. When they deployed the National Guard here in August, I made a video about it at the time, and I mentioned how you can hear helicopters flying over on like an almost constant loop. And I get that that sounds a little bit maybe over dramatic, but I'm telling you where I live, there's almost constant helicopter traffic, at least especially at that point in time. And then I read in the Washington Post they actually mapped out the flight patterns of all these different helicopters, and it was just this massive increase from where the traffic had been before. And this is just another example of that security state that you feel it, you really experience it when you're here on the ground.
Yeah, even in one of our episodes, maybe that was like an episode from last month, like the episode where the helicopters were flying
Oh
over
yeah.
us when we were shooting outside one time. And yeah, literally like I think it was like five of them. We can link the video to that too, but that was kind of insane. Or just hearing things go around as well. I kind of want to circle back like to the National Guard a little bit. I feel like we've been referencing and talking about them forever at this point. I actually don't remember DC without them. Um,
I do. I remember when Biden was president, and it was a very different city at that point.
yeah, I was just here with a friend, and she's like not from DC, doesn't live in DC, had only been like one other time, and we were metroing somewhere, and people who do live in DC right now know that like at nearly all the metros, that's where they kind of like hub together. Um, but I remember she said something funny like, "Oh my God, yeah, they're really here," and I was like, "Wait, who?" Like, I literally looked around and I was like, "What are we talking about right now?" Because I kind of got scared. And I realized she was talking about the guard, and I realized how like desensitized I am to that now. Like I was literally like, okay, and what do you mean by that? Like they've been here. Like, and she kind of was asking me a lot of questions like, what is it like? What do they do? What's sort of training do they have to do to join the guard? Like she was like, don't they have to like go to academy and all this stuff? And I was like, oh no.
You think so?
Yeah, yeah, she was like genuinely like, I'm learning something new today. Like this is crazy to me. And I think seeing it from her perspective, I was like, you're so right. Like, this is like, I guess, crazy. It's just something that people who are often in DC or who live here or from here, like, are kind of used to at this point.
Right, and so when they first deployed the Guard back in August, and then deployed to various other different cities around the country too, until they kind of got slapped down, there's again legal reasons why they are able to deploy here and kind of maintain a consistent presence for almost a year now.
Trump's jurisdiction over DC.
hmm And so when they first deployed, I remember the reason I was getting really spun up about it, a couple of reasons. I thought it was going to attract more threats of violence, like from people who are feeling emboldened or feeling kind of like again overly restricted or monitored by having that guard presence. And that did end up happening in November, where they were targeted for an attack by an immigrant who unfortunately killed at least one of the two that he shot. And I also just worry about the desensitization, exactly what you just said, of when we have a constant presence of military, it causes people to like lose sort of the I think instinctual pushback that you should have when the state is trying to exercise some amount of authority or even just showing its ability to control or exert itself over the citizens. And so I was very worried about how that would desensitize the population of DC and all these other cities to um, coming to a point where they accept this level of control or oversight. And I resist that at every level.
Yeah, it's just hard not to become desensitized to something like that when they're there all the time. Um, I'm trying to think of when I've been like, oh, I want them here, and it's usually in times where I'm like alone and something sketchy is going on, and I'm like, wait, like I should probably have pepper spray on me or something. But of course, that's when I don't even see them anywhere.
And to expand on that a little bit, my point is that a lot of it is psychological, and people will ask me even like, well, if you're not breaking any laws, then why worry about the guard being there? And they same thing with ICE. They say, well, if you're not breaking any immigration laws, then why worry about ICE coming into your city and arresting, deporting people who shouldn't be there, quote unquote. But the reason is, again, it's a desensitization to the state reaching into all of our lives and exerting itself where it doesn't belong. And we have seen that in numerous cases since Trump's come back in office, both in DC and around the country. And so even though I'm okay with the guard themselves being there, like I think all of them, I think, do a great job of kind of not being obnoxious. They kind of stand off to the side, keep to themselves. I actually haven't heard of any instances where they've really stopped crime.
Yeah, me
Like,
neither.
I haven't heard of a single anecdote or story, but maybe they have.
But I plead the fifth. Like, I don't
I
know.
don't know.
I don't know. I don't want to say they're not doing anything if I haven't like really even tried to look for what they're doing. I remember being like, damn, they're just driving around. When it was really snowing here, I was like, damn, they're just driving around in their little mobiles, like doing what in this roads that are covered in snow that you can't even really drive or walk through right now.
So yeah, just remaining mindful of the fact that it's a psychological imposition as much or more than the physical imposition of it. And I think DC intuitively understands that. They understand that that's just a part of Trump's kind of ethos. Like we've been through this his first term, now this term. And DC is very good at resisting also. Like we've talked about the
The
creative
sandwich.
ways. Yeah. The creative signs that people put up in their front yards or around the city about like no cooperation with the occupation and stuff like that. There's many sayings and slogans that are funny. A lot of DC has a good sense of humor too.
That's what I love about like the people who live here and the communities here coming together, being like, this is still our city. Like, we don't, we oppose this happening type thing in very creative ways, oftentimes.
So one thing you've mentioned too, a lot of times people conflate sort of whoever's in leadership with DC with what the rest of the city must believe
Yes,
politically.
yes.
So do you want to speak to that a little bit?
I feel like a lot of people who have never been to DC, whenever especially when I'm on the West Coast, actually, like people always ask me, like, oh, like, what's it like over there? Or like, what's going on over there? Are there like a lot of Trump supporters there? And it's quite the opposite, actually. I would say that DC is a very liberal, like, left city, and the changing of the president or the ideology right now in the House is definitely not something that has like affected the city. If anything, it makes everyone here more passionate about opposing what's happening like in their backyards, is what I've seen.
And it is a very left-leaning city, and we have to be very careful, I think, of not getting kind of swept away in the reacting against the current administration. It sometimes can again when it feels very personal and it feels like the stuff that is happening politically is manifesting in your personal life and in your world, it's hard not to get a little bit reactive and a little bit emotional at times and lash out. But I strongly caution against that, and I think if you are going to mount a productive resistance, it shouldn't just be against something that you don't like. You should be trying to put forward a vision that is going to be better than the alternative. And so that's something I think we've kind of had to figure out too since moving here is what's the more productive way of pushing back that's not just going to be perceived as like Trump derangement syndrome or we're just like crazy lefties who live in a bubble who you know, are mad that Trump is here because it's a lot deeper than that. For me, it really does go back to, like I said, I worry a lot about the implications of the state, and I don't care if it's Republican or Democrat in control trying to weaponize the state against citizens. I'm gonna get annoyed, frustrated, and resist it no matter what.
I really like what you said about making sure that you're not just pushing back, but also pushing back for a purpose. Like kind of having that future forward look of like what you would want our government to look like or what you would want as a young professional to see the future of our world for like our children and like um future generations or like what we'd want to change and not just propose like what we're against because I mean there's a lot that I think I'm against but there's reasons why and I think that there's there's solutions as to better execute a better future for ourselves when we get older.
Yeah, and most of my favorite politicians, there's a couple that I actually admire on a personal level, and but all of my favorite ones are not the ones who came up from the inside through the DC like climbing the hill essentially, but the ones who are kind of a Trojan horse in a way. They come in, they get really messy and get really creative and kind of loud on certain specific issues that they care about a lot, but like maybe they were like a small business owner back in their home state, or they're very much salt of the earth of wherever they're coming from and representing, and bringing that lived experience of actually having a life outside of politics. And that offers, I think, a perspective that is way more important and useful than, again, the people who have lived in the swamp and like are of that world. And especially, unfortunately, a lot of times if they come through the military, they're of that similar, or the intelligence community, they're also of kind of that milieu of swamp creature. But I like my politicians to have lived some life, and had some real world experience before they show up in Capitol Hill trying to tell everyone else what they should do.
Me too. I agree with that. Speaking of politicians, that's another one I think that people don't realize how closely connected you become when you're living here, even if it's like doing something completely outside of politics. Like the degrees of separation that you experience when you're in this area, when you're even just friends with somebody who lives in this area. Like I think at that point you're like 2 degrees away or like 1 degree at most sometimes, or at least sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, through both of our jobs, we've certainly had our own experiences and encounters with people on both sides of the aisle. Abby has a specific anecdote where she was talking with Maxine Waters at one point.
Yeah, that was actually crazy. And it was through a connection that like was so unrelated to politics. Like it was my job that I had where I was working with pre-law students and I was trying to find guest lecturers um for one of our sessions, and I remember I was hanging out at one of our vendor restaurants, honestly, like meeting planning for a next time. And the owner of the restaurant, he was somebody who, at this point, we had a relationship with because we would always like bring our students there. And we were kind of telling him about like our predicament, just like, I don't want to say ranting, but just like being like, oh, this is what we're trying to figure out right now. We have an open slot next Tuesday. We don't really know what's happening. And I remember him being like, does it have to be a lawyer? And I was like, no, like it'd be cool if it was somebody in like the legal world or like maybe in politics, like these students are all going to be pre-law type thing. And it was literally just the most casual conversation. And he goes, do you know Maxine Waters? And we were like, yeah, like she's a congressional rep in California. And we were like, okay, like what about her? Oh, actually, no. I remember him first saying, "Do you want a Democrat or a Republican?" And I was like, "What are we talking about right now?"
It's like some menu of some sort.
Yes, like he's literally like we're sitting at this table, like having this meeting, like whatever.
House or Senate?
Literally what happened. And then he's like, "Oh, because she's one of my best friends." This random owner of a restaurant. I still have his number and he's like awesome, like if I ever go back there again. But just that's just a side note. And me and my coworkers at the time, there's like two of us there, we were like, "What are you talking about?" And he goes, "Let me call her up." And he literally starts calling Maxine Waters on the phone, and it's on speaker as well. And I think he got in contact with first like hit her like chief of staff or something like that. And he's like, "Hello," and like, "Where's Maxine?" And he goes, "Oh, like let me pass you through," because he knows the chief of staff knows this person and that they're friends. And he's like, "Oh, I have somebody here who runs an internship program and she was wondering if she could talk to you." And I was like, "What?" And I remember he handed the phone over to me and I was like, "Hi," and I had to give her my little elevator speech over the phone, which I wasn't prepared to do at all, and talk to her for like maybe 30 seconds. She was like, "I'm gonna see if I'm gonna be in DC next week." This was like around Yeah, this was like around like 10 months ago, I want to say. And she was like, I might be there, but if I do, I would love to like talk to your students, like all this stuff. It ended up like falling through. Like I don't think she ended up coming, but after that, like I got put in touch with the chief of staff and like we like got put on the I don't know, it was just so crazy.
Right. So, what you're saying about the degrees of separation, you're never that far away from having direct communication with people in actual positions of authority and power, and that's kind of exciting and interesting feature of being in DC. But then it's also a little bit surreal at times, and there's sort of a bit of transactional nature that comes with that, where a lot of times when you're interacting with people, it's sort of like a who's who do you know, and that's not always pleasant. Like it's not really conducive necessarily to
Yeah.
having this like open, welcoming feel. It's more of like what can you offer me, and vice versa, and so yeah, that's just kind of the name of the game around here. But it's cool because you get to do fun stuff like talk to Maxine Waters on the phone.
And even that connection, I wouldn't say felt very transactional, but more
Yeah.
felt from a place of like, because I do experience that where I'm like, oh, this feels like really transactional. And like, I feel like I'm like filtering myself through this like LinkedIn network warrior type thing. For the most part, I've found that I get the most meaningful interactions and connections through just authentically being myself, like not even like trying to act like some sort of way. Like I think when I try to filter myself through that lens, I become very like stiff and nervous versus like being myself. Like this was through like a restaurant owner. Like I had no idea he was at all connected to anyone within that world, but that's how you kind of know like if you treat everyone nicely and authentically. I think that those things and favors like that kind of come naturally to you.
hmm Yeah, totally. I mean, you don't have to always be like strategy minded. I actually think that the best mode of operating in DC is to be very spontaneous and very open. Try to not, again, like leverage what you can get out of other people. It's
Yeah.
pretty gross.
Yeah,
But
I don't like that at all.
rather, again, cultivating those personal relationships so that you never know what opportunity might present itself to you. That's I think the biggest perk of being in DC.
Yeah, and I would apply that to any city, anywhere in life. I think all of your best connections come from people who like authentically know and respect you. So like why would you act like any other way outside of that?
And yeah, I guess just wrapping it up on my side of things. Again, talking about the transactional nature of stuff, but it doesn't have to be like that. And I have come to realize, being an adult here, that there's some level of distrust when it comes to like making new connections and inroads. And sometimes people have a lot to lose, and so they are not going to be the most like welcoming and inviting. But you can still find community no matter where you go. And there's a lot of hidden gems here in DC, places you can go, things to explore, and people to meet. And as long as you kind of, again, have that mentality of being open to whatever possibilities might come your way, it's a really great place for entry level professionals.
The theme of the episode. I totally agree with that. I personally am somebody who gets a lot of energy from socializing and interacting with lots of new people, and you never know who you're going to meet. So, kind of upholding that side of yourself, even if you're not the most social person, I think, even if you're an introvert or whatever, like kind of extending that natural human kindness and decency to everyone is just the best way to go about it. And if you're trying to make connections, always saying hi is a great place to start.
Yeah, we can make the swamp a little less swampy, and that's what we aim to do here in DC.
And then washed up. Yeah, I think we're done for the week.
Yep,
Washed
washed
up
up
out.
out.